Is it always a good thing to be close to God? I think you will feel that you should say yes. But I think Numbers makes us pause and at least contemplate yes and no. See what happens when a perfectly holy God comes to live amongst a sinful people. Well, last week we set out in this big book of Numbers and we saw Israel camped in tents at the wilderness of Sinai. It was a sensational, dramatic exodus from Egypt by God's power. I remember when Jacob's family first arrived in Egypt, they were just a family. There were 70 of them, his 12 sons and their households, and they were looking for food during a famine. In that time in Egypt, hundreds of years, by God's blessing, they had grown into a great nation. Last week we saw maybe around 2 million people. And now they were heading back out of Egypt towards the land God promised them, the promised land, Canaan. They'd been stopped at Mount Sinai for about a year. And that seems like a long time when you're going to the promised land. Why a year? What were they doing at Sinai? Well, actually, I think it would have been a busy time. They'd received the covenant law. Moses went up the mountain for 40 days, and God had given him, on behalf of the people, their new constitution, the national law for Israel as they were going into the land. And as Moses came down the mountain, he would need to teach the people. This was their new way of life. The people needed to know the laws and follow them. So there might have been some sort of Sinai school at the bottom. And they also had to construct everything that's mentioned in the law, the tabernacle, which is the tent where God dwelt, build its furnishings. And they needed to establish the priesthood. Last week, in the first chapters of Numbers, we saw God directing the fighting men of Israel into the camp's formation to make them ready to march, to go out for conquest to the promised land. And the big feature of the whole arrangement, as we began last week, it was the tent in the center, God's dwelling, the tabernacle. It's called the tent of meeting in other places. And every tent in the Israelite camp faced that center tent. Each morning as the sun rose, as they emerged from their tents, there was the sign, God with us, in the center. How would they have felt about this? Well, surely it was both a comfort and a caution. God had chosen them. Of all the nations in the world, he'd remembered them in Egypt as they'd become slaves under Pharaoh's power, and God had shown his mighty power to bring them out. Surely looking to that tent would have comforted them of the God who was with them, going ahead to fight their battles still to come. But also they knew how frightening a God of such power and purity can be. When God descended on the mountain, it says thick a cloud and smoke covered the mountain, and the whole camp trembled. The Exodus 20, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. God was impressing his majesty on them. He wanted them to remember the reality of his holiness, because God was planning to move from the mountain into their camp. Wonderful, but dangerous. Imagine waking each morning, lifting the flap of your tent, and there in the middle of the camp, the dwelling place of holy God. How can it possibly work? How could 2 million sinful people live with God on their doorstep? If God's holiness made the whole Mount Sinai untouchable for fear of death, how could his presence now move into the center of their camp? That's the great question of our next part of Numbers, chapters 3 to 9. The serious wonder of dwelling with a holy God. And the first thing that stands out as we read these chapters, keep your guard. Keep your guard. See, chapter 3 begins with the one tribe that was left out in the census of chapters 1 and 2. The census of Israel's fighting men. The tribe of Levi wouldn't fight amongst the other brothers. In Genesis, we see Levi is not a bad fighter. Levi's strong, but he's not going to fight with the army. Instead, the Levites are appointed to guard God's tabernacle and attend to its ministry. And God's reason is given plainly. Numbers chapter 1, verse 53. The Levites are to set up their tents around the tabernacle of the covenant law so that my wrath will not fall on the Israelite community. See, God's presence demands special care. We had 2 chapters counting all the other tribes, all the fighting men. And now Numbers stops and we focus in on just one tribe. The Levites guarding the center. And it's even more important than guarding the borders on the outside. And chapter 3 begins with one family within Levi, the family of the brothers, Moses and Aaron. Aaron's sons were appointed as priests, and the wider tribe of Levites were the helpers of the priests. And so do you notice in the arrangement of the camp, there's kind of concentric circles of protection around the presence of God. In the outside, there's the ring of the 12 tribes. Then around the tabernacle is Levi, the tribe of Levi, and guarding the entrance, Moses and Aaron's sons, the priests, to serve inside God's sacred tent. See, the closer you come to God's presence, the more care. And chapter 4 reinforces that point. 2 of the clans of Levi, the families within Levi, Gershon and Merari, they're to care for and carry the larger structures. A lot of the grunt work, moving the tabernacle, the curtains, the coverings, the bases, the posts, the frames. One clan, the Kohathites, they're responsible for the holy things. The ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars. And as you read into chapter 4, there's much more detail given to these things at the center, where God is. Being a Levite, it's not just an honorary role, a simple figurehead kind of role. It's a tremendous responsibility. And Numbers 3:10 says, anyone else who approaches the sanctuary is to be put to death. The Israelites in the camp, they can't just walk in to the middle. Even the Levites can't just walk in. See, before the camp moves, Aaron and the sons, they have to cover the objects in the center. They have to be carefully covered. Then the Kohathites who carry them can come in. They mustn't touch anything. There's poles inserted for carrying. They mustn't even look at those things, or they will die. As Aaron's family is introduced in that chapter 3, we see the names of his eldest sons, Nadab and Abihu. And the mention of these names takes us to Leviticus 10, the book before Numbers. The first priests after Aaron, his eldest sons, die. because they come to worship and offer it to God in a way that he hasn't commanded. The first priests. See, the message is unmistakable. Traveling with the holy God in your midst takes extraordinary care. By chapter 5, the focus widens. See, the holiness of God doesn't just stop at the center tent, the tabernacle. The holiness of God reaches and touches the whole camp. And so we find laws in these chapters, laws about ceremonial uncleanness, skin diseases, bodily discharges, contact with the dead, dead bodies. These people, unclean, are sent outside the camp. Now, having a skin disease, going near a dead body is not sinful. These things don't make people guilty before God, but they are the marks of a fallen world. You could say the stains that sin has left on God's creation. And God says, not even the stains of sin belong in my presence, the presence of a holy God. See, it's very serious what we're reading here in Numbers. At this point, as I was looking through, I must admit I felt that it's a lot. It's so foreign, these things, to us. And can't we be tempted to think it's all a bit much? Lightning, smoke, priests, guards, coverings. Don't even look. Sending people outside the camp. Is God just trying to frighten people? And this is where chapters 5 and 6 are really very important. Now, you mightn't have thought it. As you read through Numbers, we just keep swapping into the chapters where there's all these laws. It's legal material. It might not be your regular reading or mine. These chapters just keep popping up in Numbers, and we're tempted to skip over them. But we can't. Because here we discover that God's holiness is not arbitrary. God's holiness is moral. The law sections teach us that human actions matter to God. How we live, what we do affect our relationship with him. And sinful human actions distance people from God. The safety barriers around the tabernacle, they're not there for a show. They are real safeguards because sinful people can't casually enter into the presence of a holy God. And so holiness doesn't just stop in the center tent. Holiness goes out and infuses every tent in the way of life of his people. And so in chapters 4 and 5, we read laws about dishonesty, laws protecting marriage, laws preserving trust. The whole camp is to reflect the holiness of God who lives among them. So if we've understood Numbers so far, we might think we've learned one lesson. Stay away from God. But friends, that would be a complete misunderstanding of what we're seeing here. The movement of these chapters is actually the exact opposite. All these guards, all these warnings, all this careful preparation exists so that God can dwell amongst his people, so that his people can draw near to him. Just think of the laws we've just mentioned in chapters 5 and 6. Even the laws that separate people, that send them out of the camp, are actually preparing them to return. There's an outer ring around the camp, but the text says the camp still belongs to those people who are out there. They're still part of Israel. They're not discarded. They're sent out for a time until they're clean again. The camp belongs to them, the law says. And their temporary exclusion is to protect the holiness of the camp that they're returning to. Or think about the law about the Nazirite in chapter 6. This law provides for any Israelite to make a voluntary vow of special dedication to God, of devotion. We know from the story of Samson, he was someone who took this vow. So when you take this vow, you abstain from wine. You keep away from dead bodies. You let your hair grow as a sign of the vow. But this is quite striking, isn't it? We've just spent 2 chapters hearing about the requirements of the Levites and priests. And then suddenly God provides a way for ordinary Israelites to enter a special priest-like devotion to God. And the language of the Levite is very similar to the language of the priests as they're set up in the text. See, the laws aren't trying to separate people, keep them away from God. The laws are making it possible for people to draw near, just in the right way. And this particularly hones us in on the preparation for the priesthood in chapters 7 and 8. We see what all the guards are for. The priests and Levites are not barriers between God and his people. They're mediators, go-betweens. Their task is to bring people to God, into God's presence. Chapter 7 is a long chapter. Chapter 7 is the longest chapter in Numbers. I now remember the need to spur myself on when my Bible reading plan comes to Numbers 7. 89 verses. It's an exciting chapter. It's when the tabernacle finally opens. It becomes open for business. But number 7 is repetitive. The 12 tribes bring offerings day by day, 12 days. And it's the exact same offering when you read it. Each day, 6 verses, the exact same thing in full detail. Why? God wants every tribe named. Every tribe of Israel, equally, they can come, they will come to God's altar. Judah and Issachar, right down to Asher and Naphtali, all bring an offering. And repeated 12 times in the details, 1 male goat for a sin offering. Just a detail in that list of things they bring. See, every tribe comes to God in the exact same way. No tribe approaches on their own merit. Every tribe comes through atonement. And because God has provided priests and Levites to minister, every tribe is welcomed to bring their offering. And see how chapter 8 sums it up. From among all the Israelites, I have given the Levites as gifts to Aaron and his sons to do the work at the tent of meeting on behalf of the Israelites and to make atonement for them, so that no plague will strike the Israelites when they go near the sanctuary. See it? Atonement, so that they may go near. Paying the price of blood, an animal sacrificed to pay the price. See, the priests and the Levites, they aren't there to keep people away from God. Well, not ultimately. God's gracious provision is these Levites and priests to bring people into his presence. And the result, ultimate blessing. all the systems and safeguards, all the rules and regulations, the priests and Levites, the sacrifices and laws, what are they all for? The gift is God himself. His presence with them. After the altar has been dedicated, the priests and the Levites, they're washed and consecrated in chapter 9. At the end of chapter 9, there's a wonderfully simple moment. Just a verse 15. On the day the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law was set up, the cloud covered it. From evening till morning, the cloud above the tabernacle looked like fire. See, God moves in. God moves in. The cloud that brought trembling at Mount Sinai now settles in the middle of the Israelite camp. And from God's presence, the blessings flow. First, God speaks, chapter 7, verse 89. 7 verse 89, when Moses entered the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, he heard the voice of God speaking to him. See, again, as we read through this one verse, we're too familiar with this idea. We would fly over this simple verse. The God whose voice fashioned the universe. The God whose voice strips forests bare. That voice comes down to speak with Moses in a tent in the middle of their camp. The God who dwells with his people is not silent. His guiding word is ever present for their journey ahead. What a gift! Moses passes on these words of life and assurance to the people of God. See, God blesses Moses with his word, and Moses brings it to the people. And also through Aaron and his ministry as a priest. Listen again to the words Aaron is commanded to speak, the words we sung in Numbers 6. This is how you are to bless the Israelites. God to Aaron. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. After reading the laws of chapters 5 and 6, you might wonder whether anyone could possibly enjoy God's favor. Who isn't unclean at some point? Even the Nazarite loses their status if someone unfortunately dies near them. And the priests themselves, they have to bring sacrifices to atone for their own sin before they think of anyone else and sacrificing for them. Who could be holy enough? Well, Aaron's priestly blessing answers that fear. God delights to bless his people. They haven't earned it. He has made a way for them to live in his presence, and he blesses them by his grace. Notice what the blessing actually is. Verse 25, the Lord make his face shine on you, be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. See, the blessing is God himself, his presence, his face. Turning towards you, not turning away, turning towards you. We have cameras and photos now. We see the kings of the world and leaders. Often, in the ancient world, only a handful of people would ever see the king's face. Very privileged people to stand before him. Remember Esther when she goes to see the king. It's her husband, and she still goes with trembling. See, to have the king's face turned towards you, that is life. To have God's face shine upon you, it's grace, peace, life in its fullness. See these blessings as God moves in. And then what brilliant timing here in Numbers. Everything is ready just in time for the first anniversary of Passover. Significant day. 1 year since that fateful night back in Egypt. Think back 1 year. A year ago, they were slaves, not together as a people. A year ago, that night, they sheltered in their homes under the blood of a lamb. A year ago, they fled Egypt in haste. A rabble, not a nation. Now look at them. God dwells among them. His word guides them. His face shines upon them. His cloud leads them. They are ready for the promised land. What blessed wonder, dwelling with their holy God. So what about you? What about us? How do you live when you dwell with a holy God? Everything we've seen in Numbers hasn't been left behind. It's the same God, but it's been fulfilled. The priests, the sacrifices, the tabernacle, it all points forward to Jesus. We heard it in our Hebrews reading. Hebrews 10. Through Jesus' once for all sacrifice, we have confidence to go through the guards, to enter the most holy place. See, the barriers haven't been ignored. They've been crossed by one mediator between God and man, Jesus Christ. Perfect holiness. Perfect holiness that he brings us in to the presence of God, and through his blood and by his Spirit, we are holy. God dwells with us. See, God has shone the light of his glory on us in the face of Jesus Christ. In Jesus, Christians have every spiritual blessing in heaven, the New Testament tells us. See, God is not just at a tent in the center of your neighborhood. He dwells at the core of your being. By his Spirit, the God who filled the tabernacle fills you, Christian. How do you live when you dwell with a holy God? Do you live with serious wonder? I want to finish with this verse from 2 Corinthians chapter 7. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. It says, therefore, since we have these promises, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. Think of Paul's logic in this verse. The God whose majesty shook Mount Sinai. He's made promises to us. That God to us. Can you believe it? The verses just before this verse in Corinthians say that God has come to us to make us his people. He says, I will live with them and walk among them. He says, I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters. What is our right response? Fear. The NIV says reverence, but the word is fear. And after Numbers, we can see why Paul chose it. Fear of God is a phrase that I think Christians, we've stopped using. We like words like respect or reverence, which feel a bit safer. But after Numbers, they are too tame. We ought to fear God. Not running scared, but the fear that trembles as you draw near. We aren't afraid of our Father. The nearer we are, the more blessed we are. Our highest joy is to live with the light of his face on us, and it leads us to holiness. If God has come to dwell with us, how could we ever treat sin lightly? How could we hear God's word and not respond? How could we ever drift back? Yes, we will pray that we would never grieve him, that he would keep us from wandering, that he would have mercy on us in our weakness and keep making us holy for the sake of his Son. Overwhelmed by his goodness and majesty and holiness and grace and righteousness, by all that God is, God's people tremble. To come face to face with our holy God means we cannot contain ourselves. The dazzling splendor of God must cause our hearts to quake. The serious wonder of dwelling with a holy God.